today's call is about working with investor clients, getting the clients, keeping the clients, finding them deals, selling them deals, and kind of things that you're going to run into along the way related to that. So the first thing that I want to chat about related to it is that it's a different process almost entirely when it comes to retail and investors. When it comes to like someone who's going to buy a house to live in or who's going to sell their house, that sale is pretty much guaranteed once the client agrees to work with you. So like the seller is going to sell their house one way or another, and it's just really a matter of which agent they're going to use. So getting a seller, getting a client becomes a traction. It becomes like the key thing that you're trying to do in order to move your agent business forward. On the buyer side, once you have a buyer who's pre-approved and they want to buy, they're going to buy either way, more times than not, and it's really just a matter of being the agent that's there with them when that happens. For investors, though, it's completely different. When you meet retail buyers and sellers, they're going to have their guard up and they're not going to want to talk with real estate agents. Investors are okay working with many real estate agents. As far as they're concerned, in many cases, more agents equals more deals being sent to them. We already have agents, and we'll talk about that. And they're not going to just like want to work with more agents. But the difference is that getting a yes from an investor is not really progress. And the reason is because as an investor, if you're chatting with an agent and they want to send you deals that fit your criteria, you're almost surely going to say yes. It's going to be non-exclusive relationship, meaning that you're going to also be working with other agents if you're that investor. So it's a very easy yes to give. And because of that, getting another investor does not necessarily equate to making progress. You also, with investors, they buy multiple properties. So it doesn't even necessarily come down to more investors is better, even more active investors, because you might find that one of your investors buys more than all of your other investors combined. So it's really about getting your core group of investors more so than just getting that yes. So when it comes to what you would measure and what you would think of as your progress and your traction when it comes to investors with these hands here, and it's basically how many deals that are going to work for their criteria can you bring to them. And in theory, all your good deals, you write offers on them, those turn into offers, those offers sometimes turn into sales. But the difference is, yeah, you really want to focus on your goal day to day is going to be looking for properties and finding properties that work versus finding people. Any questions on that? Cool. So with that being said, we do need to talk about how to get a yes from an investor. So investors, just because they'll say yes a lot doesn't mean that, especially the good investors, are really going to be that responsive even after you say yes. So what has to happen is that the investor needs to believe that you understand their criteria and that it's worth the time to explain to you that criteria. If you're at an event and you meet somebody, an investor, and you ask them what they're looking for, a lot of times they're just going to tell you something really generic, good deals, or they're looking for, flips in this area, but also this area and this area, and it's not super specific. And that's either a combination of them not yet knowing, or them just like assuming that you don't really necessarily know you don't have to go that deep into the conversation and learn about it. That's what they're thinking. So if you can kind of crack their shell by asking them more questions, and the more they tell you about what they're looking for, and the more you really understand it, this is going to build trust with the client, and it's going to make them feel like you're one of the few agents who gets it. So most agents, you'll find that a lot of investors are frustrated with the agents that they work with because they feel like they have to coach the agents, or they have to If the agents don't really understand what a good deal is, and even if they're like trying, that they still might not, like, just because needs repair or it's a low price, it's not necessarily a good deal. And so the way you convey that you understand what a good deal is by asking questions, in my experience. So some questions that have worked well for me are things like, what projects are you working on? So in this next one, actually, I'll tell you about that in a second. So what projects are you working on is a good one, because if they're already investing, this is really easy, because you can learn what they're doing and what they're buying, and then you just have to find more that are like that and figure out what it is about that they like. There's a question lower here that says, or a statement that says, tell me about your last deal. Kind of that same concept of what are you working on. When you ask people, what are you looking to buy? These kind of questions, you're going to want to narrow down with more things. So obviously the location and price is a pretty obvious one. This is where if people are giving you a lot of locations, you need to be careful, because they're going to start, it's a great deal. Well, sure, so is everybody else. So you can bring these questions back to, like, tell me about your last deal, or where is your sweet spot, if they're giving you a lot of locations on that. Price point wise, sometimes they're going to give you a price that is based on what they believe are the deals, and not necessarily their actual max price. So I would ask them, like, you can kind of basically respond to whatever price they give you with a higher price. So they're like, oh, okay, I'm looking at like probably 400,000 and stuff. And so you could say, okay, well, are you, is that like your sweet spot, or is that your max price? Like if there was a deal that otherwise was pretty similar to what you do, but it's at 500, how do you think about that? And so then they'll give you some information there, and that can also lead into a whole conversation about the variability of what a good deal is. So like at higher price points, you need more profit. At higher time frames, you need more profit, higher risks and stuff like that. But it's important to articulate those, because even though in theory, all of those kind of balance each other, each investor is going to have preferences, and uniqueness area there. But whichever answers they give you, kind of push those answers and stretch those answers in both directions to test them out. If they say they're willing to do a cosmetic rehab, what's a cosmetic rehab? So like, what about the kitchen? Is that cosmetic? Is floor cosmetic? Things like this. Even if these might seem like pretty obvious questions, these questions demonstrate an expertise by the simple fact that you are even like thinking about these things. Another one is the year built, structure type, etc. So things like a lot of investors have sweet spot criteria that they don't even necessarily think about, like the year built. Some people are just not willing to do older homes, and some people, almost gravitate towards older homes. Like if they're a rehabber and they, some people really like keeping a lot of that old architecture and materials in there, and they like it works with what they're doing. For a rental buyer, they might be thinking, oh, I don't want an old home at all. That's terrible. If it's a rental buyer who's looking to do a development play, that might, the more run down, almost the better for them. So it's not all strategies and structure types go after the same thing. If they want condos, you can ask more about the HOA, things like this. And regardless of where you go, if there is a rehab, you want to ask, like, how do they do their rehabs? This is like a good open-ended question, because you want to understand, like, do they have their own crew? Are they a GC themselves? And this is a good leadway into like, well, what kind of rehabs are like you comfortable doing? What is there anything that you're not comfortable doing? So this is where like structural things might come into play. By the way, we did a home inspection, one of these 2 weeks ago. It's great. There's all sorts of information there about structural related issues and how to tell a foundation might actually be okay. So that's definitely worth watching, and you can kind of learn more about that yourself. But as a general statement, like some investors will just say, oh, I don't want to deal with foundations at all, or they don't really know what the foundation issue is or why they would or wouldn't. Whereas others are like really into foundation problems because they feel like that gives them a competitive advantage. And that's not to say that the people who want to fix foundations wouldn't buy something that doesn't have one, but it's a good thing to like know about what they do because now you understand their deals better. Likewise, you want to ask them how they're buying their deals, how they're financing them. So this is like a great qualifying question because if they don't have an answer to this, they're clearly not buying deals. Yeah, or they're not yet ready. Like they might actually be totally ready except for this part, and then you can introduce them to some lenders. But it's a really telling question right here because if they have an answer right away, then you know that they're doing deals. So you can also ask them, who do you use and what do you pay? This question will give you an opportunity to have an expertise here because you know what the market is at. So if you think they're overpaying or it's a really good deal, just being able to like have that conversation with them, or they're like, oh, I get it at 8%. You can be like, wow, that's really good. Where do you get that from? You know, knowing that that's really good is important. Whereas somebody who's not an investor might not think 8% is good, or they might say, you know, 12%. You go, oh, why? Where are you getting that? Are you happy with that? I'd be happy to introduce you to some lenders who are lower than that, things like that. So ideally, though, you want to find somebody who, you know, maybe for you, you'll find that you prefer working with new investors versus experienced investors. But if you want to work with, you know, more experienced investors, you're probably not going to want to work with people who say, who haven't figured out the financing part. So the process that you're going through asking like these kind of questions is a learning process where you want to understand what they're saying, and then a digging process where you kind of like dig into it and unpack some of what they say and get more specific. This is really where the sale happens, where the trust building happens, is that you can like ask these kind of questions. I've got a little sculptor in the back chiseling away at something, and so that's the same idea here, is that the answer is in there, but you got to like get to it. And the higher quality your questions are along the way, the more comfortable the investor will be telling you about it. Throughout the process, or especially at the end, you want to recap what they said. If you can summarize what they're looking for, that's going to make them feel good about that you actually heard them and you weren't just kind of like yeah-ing along the whole time. And then it works as a really nice kind of follow-up move too, because you can basically say, okay, it looks like this, this, and this. Okay, great. Well, I'll send you an email just to confirm that I've got this information right. And I'm looking for deals every day. So when I find one like this, I will let you know. So this is like, you get their card, send them an email, and in the email, you should basically just recap what that criteria is. And that's, I would say, like pretty much all the client relationship building you should be thinking about. In my experience, something like anything beyond that can actually be counterproductive. So like if you get an introduction to a client, or, you know, they kind of like sort of, there's something there, and then your next step is you're asking, oh, do you want to get coffee? Now, some people do want to get coffee, but for a lot of people, especially people who are busy doing a lot of deals, the coffee is going to feel like a lot for them because it means they have to like go somewhere, you know, etc. So, you know, trying to build a relationship more could stall the relationship out itself. Like, they're here to do business. That doesn't mean that you guys can't small chat and talk with them and like have a good relationship and actually like them and all that. But I think when it comes to this follow-up email and stuff, like if you've been able to hear their criteria and you know they're qualified, you need to stop selling. And it's just about confirming that, hey, here it is, and then you'll be on the lookout for these deals. Now, the lookout for the deals is really important because if you send them a bunch of deals right off the bat, it probably means you didn't hear them because they're probably looking for it themselves. In most cases, it could be a niche situation where that's not going on, but chances are they probably saw a lot of these properties already. And anytime you see a list of something to click into, that's like a project for the receiver. So the receiver is going to have to, like, you know, do it when they're at their computer, and then they're going to keep forgetting when they're at their computer, and then they're not going to respond, and they're going to feel bad about it, and you're not going to know what's going on. So and that's like a best case scenario. And worst case is they just like don't think you understand what's going on anymore, because if they are looking for a, you know, quote unquote good deal, then that good deal doesn't happen to be lying around, unless it's from like a few days ago or today and you've been working it anyways. And then you could be like, oh, actually there's a property thing that fits that. You could do that, but you don't want to like get a list to say, hey, what works for you here. You also don't want to like just put them into a drift right away, because they're not looking for that. They're getting a lot of emails already, and it kind of signals the wrong approach, that for as far as you're concerned, you already got the client just because they said yes, whereas for them it's completely different. So there is maybe some exceptions, just because there's so few, that each one might be worth looking at, and each one is kind of by definition a candidate, compared to like a flip. But yeah, by and large, you want to be sending them follow-up just to recap that info and be understanding it, because then when you do find that property, that's when you'll actually you know, send it. So it could be a couple days later there. So sorry, I'm kind of giving you guys quite a lot on this slide. Any questions before I continue?
No.
Feel free to just jump in if you guys got anything. So some extra little tips that I find work well for kind of securing the client is that it's always good to relate with experiences. Anytime, like if you've even done just one flip and you can say like, oh yeah, on my last one, XYZ happened, like that's going to signal this person is, you know, has done deals, or at least one, you know, they're doing something, they get it. And you can keep using that in different ways. You can say, oh yeah, I've got one, you know, done one deal where this, you know, thing happened, or like, oh, had a contractor once in this situation, you know, and it could all be based on just a couple of deals that you've done. It doesn't have to be extensive, but these kind of little things, if you can relate with them, and you don't say them just to brag, you say them to like, because it's something that came up in the conversation. These little signals demonstrate like competence. Ideally, like they want to think like, oh, this person like is badass. They know what they're doing. They're clearly like, they do deals. This is what they do. You're also going to get into some questions that you might disagree with. Like if you ask them what they want and they're like, oh, I want like, you know, for me, for a while, I had a problem with like, when people would tell me that they're looking for like, it has to have 3 bedrooms, and it has to have like, you know, 2 bathrooms or something, like minimum, like 1.75 bathrooms minimum. Because to me, I felt like those things were very restrictive. Whereas what if a 2-1 did just as well? Like if they're a flipper, you know, if it's a landlord, maybe not, but you know, there's certain things that like come up that sometimes I think, I'm not sure I like totally agree with that. Or they're like, you know, it could be things like, oh, you can't, there's no good rentals in Seattle. You know, it's, you know, that might be a disagreeable statement. So in this situation, it's good to kind of like understand why, what they're looking for, what their goals are behind it. So it could be that the like cash flow is really important to them at this stage. And so they're looking just for lower end areas. And it could be that they just think, oh, like if it's a 2-1, it's just going to sit there on the market. And if you happen to know that that's not true, and be like, you know, is that something that you can, you know, you can still go, okay, well, like focus on those. Now, if we find a 2-1, like a really good area where, you know, you've got a lot of, you know, where there's other 2-1s, is that like, would you feel comfortable looking at that deal? Or do you really just want to stick with like these ones and stuff? And I think you'll find that people, investors especially, are pretty open to stretching certain criteria if you don't like it. Now, in general, you almost want to narrow their criteria, but for sometimes you'll want to expand that criteria. And so it's important to understand why. The price is another one where we expanded that criteria. but the location is one where we don't want to necessarily expand that criteria too much, unless their location is like Green Lake or something. And then you might want to ask why. You know, like you might want to ask, okay, you know, how far out does that go? Do you do Ballard? Or is Ballard a little too far? And they go, no, you know, I live there and I've got some crews doing other projects there, and it's really easy for us to do that. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe they just think, well, it's my first one and I live there, so I figured that'd be easier. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, would you do like Lake City or something? And they'll go, yeah, I guess that's not that far. I can do that. So in those cases, you can expand it. But by and large, people will be like, oh, you know, King, Pierce County, wherever. Like, this is very broad. So, and sometimes the location criteria is the price criteria. Sometimes you'll be like, hey, I'll buy anywhere in King and Pierce County under this price. And that kind of acts as almost a location filter by itself. Flip versus rental clarity. Flippers, super easy to define. If you can't get like a hard, like, if you can't get like, the flipper should be the easiest in terms of like getting responses, getting yeses, moving things forward, or you know, stopping and not being able to. You know, rental stuff is a lot more vague, and this is an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage is it's harder to define what a good deal is. So you're not necessarily going to be like, oh, it's just once a week, there's only this one deal. It could be that there's actually several properties that they're looking for, and this is the rental's a very like why heavy reason. So rentals really just go into so many directions there. I will say that some things that you might bump into on the rentals are rehab. People often who are newer investors want a rehab in their rental, but they're not necessarily sure why. They just think it's like going to be a better deal for them. So you can ask about those questions too. But some people, like, rentals really just go totally across the board. I was speaking with somebody last week who told me that their goal was generational wealth. And so for me, I was like, you know, it's not like, I was telling them like they shouldn't spend any time thinking about like rehabbing properties or like, you know, trying to like go find these obscure deals where it's slightly better margin. Like, they're buying for like generations to come. Like, they should be focused on what areas they like believe in and that they want to have wealth in, things like that. Because the market over the course of 50 years is like, it's going to be fine one way or another. Off market versus the MLS. I think you'll find that a lot of active investors don't have a bias against the MLS because they've done it and it works for them, and it hasn't, like, it's been a good source. Some newer investors might only want off market. They might think they only want off market, and this is an opportunity to kind of like be their first on market agent. But the kind of exception here is there are going to be people like you guys who are both agents and investors. So like, you're not really going to get these people as investor clients. But when it comes to the off-market objection, I find that it's there's kind of a couple things that I've used that have worked well for me. One is that like it's they say there's no good deals in the MLS, and so I try to learn more about their experience and stuff. But it's important for them to understand that there's kind of two parts to the MLS. There's like the MLS that has bidding wars, and then there's the parts of the MLS where you lowball opportunities. But the main thing that I will tell an investor if they're like really resistant to the MLS is like, listen, you know, if you look around this room and you talk to everybody else here, or everybody you meet in the next 10 meetups, every single person is going to tell you to buy off market, but no one is ever going to tell you to buy on market. So where's the competition? And this is something that I actually really believe, and that we've had data to be actually back up since, is we know that the MLS is actually, in many ways, is actually more fruitful than off market. The average deal, even on flips, has higher margins and profit on them, and there's just more flips that are actually purchased on the MLS than off market. So there's quite a lot of opportunity on the market. So if they're resistant, though, it's more of just like, you know, you still can crack them by just kind of learning this information And then you can just say like, all right, well, hey, if I find you a deal and it's not going to be super competitive or whatever the reason is that they gave you, is that something that, you're ready to pull the trigger on? And I think you're going to see investors generally hate saying no. This is another reason why it's deceptive to get a yes from an investor and think you're doing well. Investors hate saying no because it feels like it cuts them off to opportunity, and they're so opportunity driven. So saying no feels like that's the end of it forever. So they would rather kind of give you like a half yes or a fake yes or like a maybe yes, and see where it goes. And so I find that one way or another, you should be able to at least get a, hey, well, can I send you a deal? Not to say that it'll be worth your time, but if they're otherwise a client you want, you can do that. So what's the scoop? This is Martha Stewart. She was for insider trading, so that's why I put her back here. The scoop is my way of saying like basically what's the insider deal that makes this opportunity exciting to pursue. So in some cases, the scoop is as simple for like a good active motivated buyer who doesn't mind making offers. The scoop can just be like, hey, here's a good price, and just hit the market. And like they're reviewing offers on this day, or it could be that like they're just hit the market, and like but it's like I've been tracking this one on the market and there's no offers, or there are offers, whatever it is. Like the scoop is telling you, hey, this is why you want to go after this deal. Now for the people who are hesitant to write offers, the scoop pretty much has to be like an unusual situation to get them interested, or what feels like an unusual situation to them. And maybe broadly speaking, a lowball opportunity. So if something was listed on Thursday, Friday, and come Monday, Tuesday, there's no offers, a really interesting scoop is to have called the agent and learn that there's no offers, and then you can tell the investor, hey, this thing was on the market all weekend. They did 2 open houses. They have no offers right now. The seller's probably panicking. This is a very interesting scoop because for the investor, it feels like they get this like extra opportunity. The investor almost fundamentally believes that they're going to outperform the market. So they have to believe that there's a reason why they outperform the market, because they held out for these kind of scoops. But whatever it is, it could be like, oh, hey, I've been doing some digging, and it turns out that they like actually want to live here for 2 months afterwards. So I think like, how do you feel about making an offer, renting it out for 2 months, and then doing that? So the scoop is just like whatever is going to be interesting and enticing, and something that they can just digest in that email. But when you send them the scoop, you will probably not always get a response because they're busy, and so then you have to follow up. So the scoop doesn't have to be like some perfect email or whatever. I'll often like just send an investor a link, and then I'll text them, hey, I just sent you a link. Here's the scoop on it, basically. And then like when we like let's do a call or something. But that makes it almost more scoopy, I would say. Like the more formatted your email is, the less scoopy it might seem. You want to do like pretty bare bones. So where Pellego comes in to this, when it comes to, it's like you can send them the link through Pellego, and you can create your version of the analysis on Pellego. But it can still just be a simple email that you send them with a link and be like, hey, here's the link, and then you just text them and tell them to click on that link. I find that combo actually works pretty well, because there's a certain like casualness to it that just creates more authenticity, I think, to like just sending a link versus like having a formatted thing. It also conveys more urgency because you didn't have time to like draft up some email, and it's already assumed that they're going to buy with you if it works. So in general, actually, I would say the communication should feel very much like communicating with like a friend or a sibling. There should be a lot of like messaging, a lot of like informalities. And when it comes to sending the scoop, and you do your follow-up, you need to get to a decision with them. No decision is completely unacceptable, I would say. If they're traveling, the decision can be like, hey, I'm traveling, I can't look at it or something. But investors, and I've sold investors deals that I had to follow up with them like 8 times to finish their offer. Also, someone's got a dog. Can you mute your microphone? So investors don't mind at all being followed up with if like they need to move on and stuff. But you need to get a decision. All right, I'm gonna find you soon, whoever you are, barking person. Where are you? Where did the participants go? I can't see it because I'm the organizer. Oh, there they are. Okay, we gotta mute anyways. Okay, so the scoop. Okay, so there has to be like, yeah, there has to be a scoop, and you need to get to a decision, and you need to be willing to follow up as, you know, to get that decision. And the decision has to be yes or a reason, or you drop the client. Because if an investor is just not feeling it, they don't know what they're doing. Like, what do you mean they're not feeling it? Like, you need to be able to get to like a specific thing. So a yes isn't obviously an easy. If they don't want to do it, you should ask them. It comes down to 1 or 2 things. You can ask them, what price would you be interested in it? Because it's either a price thing or something else. So in theory, if this is otherwise a good deal for them, maybe they just don't believe the margin is there. They think the ARV is too high or the rehab is too low. And so the price becomes the thing. And the scoop in many ways is saying, hey, I can get you a property at the price that works for your criteria. So if they're going to say no, the reason you have to be able to give you a price reason or a criteria change reason. So like, let's say price isn't the issue. Let's say they're like, well, you're like, well, what price would you, just for my knowledge, you know, what price would make this a good deal for you? And then they might go, well, you know what? I don't know, like I'm just a little worried that we're not going to be able to get good tenants here or something. And you might learn like, actually, they don't want this location at all. Even though they said they did, they don't, or something. So reasons are okay because they help you clarify. You'll figure it out, you know, you'll get closer on the next scoop that you send them. But a reason is good. But not being able to make a decision is pretty much always bad, I would say. Any questions on that? If you don't get a response, by the way, you should like, you do actually want the no to clear it out though eventually, or just drop them. But like you could text them like, hey, haven't heard back from you. I assume you're not interested. I assume this one, you know, is a pass for you. Or you could say like, you know, whatever your context is with them, but you basically need to push them to actually giving you an answer. And I would never shy away from doing that because you feel like it's going to be awkward or weird or something like that. I get that people are busy, but you're only sending them deals that should be really exciting for you. So like the ideal day-to-day process is you're looking for scoops. And when you find a scoop, you need to be thinking scoop property, like scoop first, then investor. So like you are going through your kind of areas that you look for, or like you have like your broader search that covers all of your clients. And you can say, you can look through all of those deals every day. And when you find the scoops and you're calling the agents and you're kind of creating these things, the client doesn't have to really be there quite yet. You're just kind of like seeing where the scoops are. And then you send it out to your client from that point. So day to day, you're looking for these, and you'll send them over when you have them. So, and because of you're sending them day to day, these scoops are all like, in theory, they're like, you actually think they're good deals. So if you're following up, it's out of like a genuine follow-up and not a salesy follow-up. It's like if you're buying for your brother or something, you know, or like a sibling or whatever, and you're like, they just need to like respond because like I just like moved the world for them and this is a good deal. You're doing them a favor, and you really need to believe that. And I think you'll find that in most cases, the serious investors, when they finally get back to responding to you, they'll actually say sorry, they were like in meetings or whatever. They're not going to be like missed that you followed up. They're going to probably thank you for following up if it actually is a good deal and works for their criteria. Okay. So strategies for the MLS. On a high level, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Standard sales are, most of what we're talking about today are standard sales. So bank-owned sales and REOs, the bank often has specific selling guidelines and like price points that they're not allowed to go below. And so, you know, there are exceptions to that, like if quarter end is coming and they need to get things off the books. But generally speaking, banks are like the least flexible of any seller. And even though bank owned sounds like the best deal, in a market that's competitive, bank owned ones are like the worst deals because you're, or at least like the hardest to get the margin that you would need as a flipper. As a landlord, you know, you could be good there. If you got somebody who wants to like do a house hack or, you know, be an occupant at the beginning, bank owns are great because they have that owner occupant period at the beginning for in many cases 15 days where investors can't even bid on them. So if somebody wants to live there and get a good deal, bank owned places actually are quite attractive. But if you're not, in the absence of that, if you're not living there, bank owned properties are just really not that flexible, and the good deals on them are going to come from like a market condition where the pricing is just, everything is kind of like slow and uncertain. So the pricing can just like, there's just not as much competition necessarily. The short sales are like the exact opposite of that spectrum in that they'll say yes to pretty much any offer because the seller doesn't make any money from it anyways. And the listing agent doesn't care really that much anyways. They're just worried that this is going to go into foreclosure. The most like open and flexible to the pricing. But keep in mind, behind the short sale is the bank, and the bank might not be flexible at all on the on that price. So the opportunity to the extent that there is one, is having a lot of short sales. And those short, assuming you can like finance it and stuff, but those short sales, every now and then they might come back to you and accept it, or they might counter, but that counter works for you, and you have the option to accept or not accept. Maybe the market's gone up and the counter's higher, but now the market's gone up. So the short sales give you, short sales, like you can kind of sprinkle those, if you will, and kind of see what grows out of them. There are like, at the end of the day, like some of the, short sales will really come down to kind of like a bit of luck. Some people I've seen like try to like purchase furniture from the seller as like a separate transaction. I'm not sure how kosher that is, and I'm pretty sure it's probably illegal to overpay for some of these things. But keep in mind the seller's motivation here is, by default at least, is like they have no motivation. They just want to avoid foreclosure. But honestly, foreclosure doesn't even seem that bad to them, because like as far as they're concerned, their life's already ruined. So the listing agent's really the only motivated individual in the short sale situation, unless you got something else going on. Okay, so most of what we're talking about standard, unless we've specified otherwise. So hot listings versus sale listings. Hot listings, hits the market, it's hot, a good price, no need to kind of go more into that. Versus a sale listing has been sitting around a while. Now, I will assert that the hot listing is less time sensitive than the sale listing. The hot listing is the reason why everybody thinks the MLS is not a good place to get deals, because if it's priced low enough, in a desirable area, or what have you, it's going to have tons of buyers, and it's going to get bid up to some sort of market price. And that market price makes it not good for somebody who wants to do better than market on it, like a flipper. So it seems like those ones are just, they kind of give the MLS a bad reputation for the investor buyers. But the thing is, because there's an expectation of multiple offers, there's not as much of a rush to get your offer in today. Because if they're expecting 2 or 3 offers tomorrow, it's super unlikely that they're going to take the first one and not to see what the other ones show up as. And that means that you get an opportunity to like ask them more. And as we touched on earlier, if at the end of the weekend that hot listing is not so hot anymore, that's a crazy opportunity for you too. So hot listings, I think that you should spend more of your time on the stale listings. I'll get into that in just a moment. But on the hot listings, I would certainly keep track of what's going on. And the main thing I would do is just, stay in touch and keep track of those deals. As if your buyer was like on the fence or something about it. So stale listings, though, I think stale listings are pretty time sensitive. And the reason is because, and I see this, I happened so many times. I think I saw it just a couple of weeks ago with one of our agents. It's amazing how many times you'll find a property that has been on the market for a while, no activity, and all of a sudden 2 offers show up at the same time. And the reason is because these offers move slowly. If you're a listing agent listing a sale property, you don't want to accept an offer before the absolute last minute, or if you're going to counter, there's no point in countering by the expiration. You might as well wait for it to expire and then counter, because either way, the contract is a new one at this point. And during that time, somebody else might show up. And as a listing agent, your move that you're hoping and praying for is that someone will call up being interested, and then you can say, actually, you know what? We just got an offer, and we have we have until tomorrow to accept it. So why don't you guys go check it out? And then all of a sudden tomorrow there's a bidding war. So that's like the perfect situation for a stale listing. So as on the buyer end of it, you don't want that to happen. And so every day counts here, because you never know when that other random buyer is going to show up. And especially if they're going to drag it on, you almost want to be prepared that, hey, they will drag this one on for a while. The hot listings, they never drag it on. They want to take that offer, get it off the MLS, and that's the motivation for the buyer to pay the high price. On the stale listing, it's the opposite. Any questions on hot listings versus stale listings? Okay, I think this is like one of the biggest things that I kind of see among our agents and investor agents in general is a hesitation to lowball opportunities, to lowball properties and go after stale listings. So the next slide is very much heavy on that, and we're going to be covering that. The last thing on the high level is to think about supply and demand of the property. So some properties are in an area, or a price point for an area, or a feature set for a price and an area that don't have quite as many buyers and sellers. There's fewer other sellers at that price or at that type of property, and there's also fewer buyers, which means that at the end of the day, it always comes down to a buyer. And they're in very dense areas. There's a lot of properties for sale and a lot of buyers looking for that. So things move a lot faster on there. So on these the timing of things, if you see a stale listing in kind of a more obscure location, that almost might be more time sensitive than the stale listing in a popular location. Because if it's stale in a popular location, well, then it's just like overpriced. And then it's just a question of getting there versus like, and if it's 20 days on market and it's kind of a unique property, then it's not clear if it's actually stale or not. And so the seller might think that it's like overpriced at that point and be willing to drop. But another buyer might think that that's totally reasonable because there's only 2 of these things for sale in general. So that's something to keep in mind. with those as well. Okay. I call this one team project because I think that this is about the dynamics between you and listing agent as the buyer's agent. And it really is kind of this like group school project style thing that you're doing with them. And when it comes to like group projects at school, everybody wants to work with the person who is going to get the good grade and do all the work, even if they don't like that person. You know, you could think that like, you know, you could be like, oh, the coolest person, and there's like the lamest person who's got great grades and stuff. You still want to work with the lame person because they're going to get it done for you, even if you don't like get along with them at all, and vice versa. So having the listing agent's going to be thinking about this too when they're thinking about the buyer that's coming in. Is this buyer going to cause more work or less work for them? You know, if the buyer seems to have no idea what's going on, to be super lazy, and you're the A student, you're going to feel really, you're not going to want that person on your team. But if they're going to do good work, you don't have to like them to want them on your team. And I think you'll as you do for, you know, if you're more experienced agent, I'm sure you'll have noticed this, and if you're a new one, you'll bump into it. But you're going to do transactions with people that you would never necessarily be friends with, but you just think this person like was just really professional. They just got it done, and I trust them along the way. So keep this analogy in mind as the listing agent is thinking about this, whether consciously or unconsciously. So how to show that you'll be an A student with them, and then how to get the most out of the situation. So you want to be prepared when you reach out to them. So look at the listing before you call them. Look at the supplemental documents. If there's a seller disclosure, read that. If there's anything on the listing that you should know about before the call, it's going to be really bad to call and not know that. So you want to be a little bit prepared in that sense. And I think I've got missing a bullet point here. Oh, no. Okay, so yeah, you want to do that. And then also with follow-up. So I think follow-up is probably the best way to build the trust here. Like if you tell somebody, hey, well, let me go check with my buyer. I think we might check it out later on this evening. The listing agent's going to be thinking, are they going to go check it out later on? If you text them with an update a little bit later, or even shortly after, and be like, hey, I spoke with my agent, my buyer, and we're going to check it out tomorrow. Even if it's not tonight, that's +1 in their mind because you followed up. And it also, tomorrow means, hey, I'm not going to price reduce today or whatever. I'm going to wait till tomorrow too. But for the building trust, just that follow-up is a huge amount. When you do go check out the property, just doing a courtesy text to say, hey, we're going to be at the property. Just a reminder, we're going to be at the property in 30 minutes. You know, hey, we just left the property. My buyer's thinking about it. Each one of these just like compounds that trust. These little things. Like you can even like get to you could even like, even if you don't have to text, just throwing in that text, you know, like maybe if it's like 4 o'clock and you said you're going to get them back to them by end of day, you can even just say like, hey, my buyer is like in a meeting, still planning to get it to you by tonight. Just wanted to give you an update. You know, these things are good too. The only way you can really mess this up is by going too far and seeming needy and feeling like if your offer doesn't get accepted, like this is the most important property to you guys. Like it shouldn't feel like that. So that brings us to negotiating with a distance. You, as far as the listing agent is concerned, practically speaking, you represent your buyer. You do not represent your buyer. If there is a distance between, if you're kind of like just trying to make the deal work for your buyer, and it's not about you wanting the deal, getting the good price, you're going to be able to. It's going to be easier to have the conversations with the agent about that. Like, let's say you make an offer and it falls apart. As the agent, you know, you can try to fix things, and by not being the investor yourself. So if you are the buyer and you're representing yourself when you buy, ideally you have like an LC. You could say like you're a member of it. Somehow you want to not be the decision maker for all of your negotiations on it. And so one example of this is lowball offers. Writing lowball offers is concerning for agents because they think this is going to ruin their reputation. And they don't want to be like, they not only don't want to waste their time, they don't want to like make the reputation to be that person who's just like writing these crappy offers. So this is an opportunity to call the agent and using the distance to say, hey, I know this is like, you know, pretty, you know, you can say, hey, my buyer is looking at this property and wants to check it out, but they're only pre-approved to this price. And I know you guys are all the way here, so I don't want to, like, let's say, waste your guys' time. Is this even in the ballpark? So a question or a statement like this kind of comes at the listing agent by aligning with their interests and saying, listen, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to write this, but you know, clients, they want you to write things, so you have to do what they ask you. But you want to save everybody time. You're kind of doing a courtesy and calling the agent. And I have found that agents respond really well to this question. They don't, you know, they totally get, every agent has had an unreasonable client, so they can just relate to that immediately, and they just assume that that's the situation that's going on there. Or like the client, like, hey, I know you guys, you know, and you could even make it not the client. You could even say, hey, listen, I know you guys are at this price. You know, my client's only pre-approved for this. I'm just kind of like calling around, seeing, you know, some options. You could go that route too. But by and large, I do think that, like, not being a decision maker lets you ask kind of better questions. So after this testing the waters, you can say, hey, is that even in the ballpark? The listing agent will respond with one of a few things. Either they're going to say, no, it's not in the ballpark, in which case, great, you've saved some time, you can leave now and not worry about it. Or they'll say something along the lines of, well, why don't you go check it out? You know, that's kind of like hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Yeah, there might be something there. This is the fun part here. Because you've established that this is like, you don't want to waste their time and that you're kind of like feel like this is probably not going to work, you can say, okay, but I just want to be really transparent with you because my buyer is only able to go to this price or only willing to go to this price, whichever it is. Is it like worth? Are you sure it's like, you know, should we like check it out? Like, is it really worth that? And if you do this right, the listing agent is almost going to be the one selling you on making the lowball, or they'll open up to you about the actual price that they need, because they're going to be thinking, you know, oh crap, I lost them. You know, they don't want to lose the buyer if it is an option. If it's not an option, they'll tell you, they'll be proud of telling you it almost, or they'll like complain about it and be like, oh, I know, right? That's where the market is, and my seller like can't go there or whatever. Then you can stay in touch or whatever. But yeah, but in the event that they kind of give you that hint that yes, there's a lowball offer, you can push harder and get them to like go further by just reinforcing, hey, I just really don't want to waste, you know, the client's time or my time, you know, like, you know, he's excited about this property, but again, you know, you can only go to this price, like, no matter how much he likes it, no matter how good the condition is, like, do you think that's even on the table for your seller? If we wrote that up, like, do you think maybe, you know, if like the other contingencies are good, do you think like that's even feasible? And you can get basically towards that yes or that no through that. And because of that, you're going to be able to make lowball offers where A, you don't look bad to the agent or hurt your reputation, and B, you spend very little time writing offers that you don't think you have a good shot for. In most cases, if you're going to get one of these deals, if you're going to lose one of these lowball offers, you're not going to lose it because the seller just flat out like refused. It's like maybe they counter, but in many cases, just somebody else showed up during that whole process. So this goes back to moving quickly on these properties that make these lowball offers on. Cool. So that's kind of how I go about the lowball strategy. I think it's just super, super unused. Huge opportunity and the easiest scoops to give investors too. Everyone wants to respond to that opportunity that's below price. You know, that's just so attractive for them, and some of the easiest, least time wasting activity you can pursue. So highly recommended. last kind of little things, making offers stand out. It's just nice to have like clean offers. And when you submit your offer, like, remember, people don't have to like you to want to trust you the most. Make your email simple, bullet point what you're offering. Don't try to connect with them about something that you didn't actually connect with them about. Yeah, if you guys actually have a really good, like, it turns out you're both yada yada and it's really cool, you could mention that. But I would rather just send a simple email that they can forward to their client, no muddying of that relationship. And then you can always text them afterwards, hey, just sent you the offer. You know, let's go like yada yada after we close this one or something. Like, you can do that in a text message separately and not at the time. Using time selectively. Making offers stand out. One more thing in here. If there's something about your offer that you believe is categorically better than the other offers, you should bring it up in your bullet points. And you know, if the client has done other purchases, you should bring those up too. Like, you know, I bought X properties with this client, or this client has bought X properties in the last, you know, year, and I've worked with them for a while. I know they're solid. These little statements are nice to throw in the email, as long as they're like, you know, semi-concrete like that, and not too wordy. But then there's things like, there's a paragraph W in the Northwest MLS Form 21. So this is like a random contingency a lot of people don't know about, that says, like, if there's anything improper or anything that's misleading about the listing, any information that's not 100% accurate, the buyer can cancel in 10 days. And so if the listing has got those kind of things in there and you just don't care and you're not going to cancel, you can cross that out and you can make a note of it and basically make it appear as if people aren't crossing this out, they're giving themselves this out. You know, you can also not tell them and use it for your own out, but that goes over horribly. That's definitely a way to burn a bridge, is to use that kind of secret out. In general, I would say that, like, this is better from like I'm going to cross it out and bring attention to the fact that other people haven't crossed it out. So this is just really more of a secure offer than anything else. Working with your clients also on this offer, if it's like a very tense situation, like it's a very close offer, I would, I often will tell clients that, hey, it's my job to ask you this question. So I'm sorry for asking you this, but you know, you say you want to do 200. Are you willing to go 201? Most cases they'll say yes, and you are willing to go 202 and 203, and you can just keep saying, hey, I'm sorry, like, you know, sorry to like do it this way, but I just want to make sure because it looks like this one really is going to be a close call, and I, you know, I want to know that we're actually at a price that you feel comfortable not getting it at. And so they'll go, okay, let's stop at 203 or something, and you might get that extra 3. You shouldn't do it by default, but if you believe that that's in their best interest, that's a good way to get it. We talked about using time, how listing agents can use time to their advantage when it comes to responses. So this is mostly something that's going to be aware of, that the listing agent is going to have this move, is going to have this time move to watch out for. So yeah, that's all the content I have. So we're just at 1 o'clock. So any questions? Cool. No questions. I'll assume that's not horrible. Feel free to reach out if you have questions along the way. One of the reasons I did this talk today, I explained why we weren't doing the equitable listing. But the reason we went with this one is because we are now distributing leads to our agents. But they have to be qualified, and actually, like, I want to make sure that you guys or the agents off this call who are interested in working with investors have like a good understanding of this process. So definitely feel free to reach out if you have any questions on this, or if you're interested in working with any investors in any specific areas or strategies and what have you.